Hi, I'm Dr. Pilet, and today we're going to do parenting styles. And if you will, I'm going to give you a brief discussion about these tools that we use to attempt to train, to mentor, if you will, to role model our children into some idea of adulthood. Remember, your job as a parent is to launch your kids, to make them more prepared for society. And so, this particular class, Parenting Styles, is about the three diverse ways that we like to see that expansive autocratic to the left and permissive to the right, and in the middle democratic. So we're going to be talking about parenting styles that bridge that all the way from autocratic down to permissive. And if you will, let me give you some backdrop to that, if you will. Okay. First of all, let me explain to you what autocratic means. Autocratic means rule regulated. Okay. This is a family where mom and dad execute a rigid style of discipline that includes lots of laws. Okay. You typically, characteristically see that the parents are intolerant. Intolerant, it's black, it's white, there's no gray. I don't accept anything other than do what I tell you to do. There is no question about this. These families tend to be black and white. It's the idea that I clearly have directed what the laws and rules are, and there is no question about this. And if you will, autocratic families tend to be regimented. Think about that word military, the military, and how we, yes sir, no sir, and we walk and we march and we try to be obedient. That's the notion of regimen, okay? Next, I want you to think to the, if autocratic is to the far left, I want you to go to the far right, which would be permissive. So imagine this continuum, okay? Permissive parenting styles. These are families that are overly flexible. Unlike the other, which is rigid, think about flexibility. Okay, they're loose as a goose. Now, because we tend to be too flexible, there tends to be a tolerance. See, now we're away from that black and white, that idea of rigid. We tolerate gray areas. In fact, sometimes the gray areas are so big that the parents are overly tolerant. They don't react appropriately when their children are failing in school or their grades are not what they should be. So we see that notion of, too much gray, not enough black and white. And if you will, there are few or no rules. Maybe if you will, it might help you to give an example, but I had a lady who, she worked from early in the morning to late at night. She was an absent parent, if you will. The kids were in their teens, old enough to, in her mind, to be alone. But because of her lack of presence, there was no idea that when you get off of school, you come home, you change your clothes, you do your homework. By the way, we eat at 6, you go to bed at 8. See, that idea that she was permissive because of her work and her job responsibilities, but in her mind, when she was present, she didn't see it that way. Well, the truth is, as an absent parent, sometimes I don't have the ability to be there to give you that influence. So if you will, the last idea about permissive, there's just very few limitations. And those notions of limitations have to do with value systems and that code of conduct that you have. You see, when we are not present enough, then the value system of the parent, which might be present, tends to not be executed in the family's lifestyle. And therefore, we wind up with this absent parent who is, in fact, way too liberal, and the limitations don't exist because she's not present enough for them to be there. Now, if you will, let me contrast to that middle area, because democratic is the way that I think best manifests how we can grow our children, if you will. Understand, all children, when they're first born, 3 or 4 years old, are raised in an autocratic. Lots of rules. You're going to eat here. You're going to take a bath at this time. You're going to go to bed at this time. Because when you're a baby, you need that autocratic idea. But as I move you to adulthood, as I move you through teens, the idea is I'm loosening up. I'm giving you more freedom of choice to exercise, these ideas that I've taught you. Okay. When we're in the middle, democratic, we're looking for parents that tend to be loving, and they're an instrument in the child's personality development. They, of course, are always aware that I've got to start off with a lot of autocratic rules, because my goal is to develop this household lifestyle that trains you to think on your own, so that when I'm not there, you can carry on. Okay. Understand that democratic parents tend to create the process by which we create rules. that teach a child how to own the family values. And that process might be family meetings. That process might be, you know, the end of the school year where we're looking at the next year and how old you are. Gosh, you're going into sixth grade, and in sixth grade you have these additional freedoms. I found that in my own son's school, who's going to Bayshore Christian. Guess what? Sixth graders, they don't have to check in aftercare anymore. They're allowed an hour of free time. That notion that they're exercising some willfulness to participate in a lifestyle, okay? Understand that when we look at democratics, the parent is the mentor. The parent becomes the mentor because we should always remember that the goal of you as a parent is to launch your child so that your child can live independently and make decisions responsibly. So, you know, that's the whole idea about that democratic notion right in the middle. But if you will, let me give you one more concept that sort of is going to overlay over this, and it has to do with this notion of parental warmth. You know, parental warmth is so important. You know, the idea that I radiate love, unconditional positive regard to my children, you know, that just tends to be like the sunlight to the seed that was planted, because when the warmth and radiation of the sun is there, then the plant grows, the child grows, the connection occurs. When parents give emotional warmth, the children bond to them. See, that's the key word, bond. I'm not using the word love, I'm using the word bond. They bond in a way that's affectionate, that's endearing, that's responsive. See, because when I bond to you and you're my mom, my dad, and I show you that I love you, then the idea that I'm disappointed is often a tool to bring that child back in to the path of getting along in that notion of growth, okay? Parental warmth. So I'm going to give you two notions, if you will. On the far left, I have parents that are emotionally engaged. We're emotionally engaged, we're warm, we're loving, we tend to encourage our child. You know, kids make mistakes, that's true, but you know, how can I encourage you through those mistakes to do better next time? We tend to be consequence focused, not punishment focused. Consequences are those things that which we reap as a result. So if I have a bad grade, then the consequence might be that I lose a certain privilege each day, in the sense that now I'm doing some extra studying, I'm doing some remedial work, okay? But understand the notion of consequence, and if you will, when we're emotionally engaged, we tend to want to validate the child's feelings. We want to validate that you are important to me, you are my son, you are my daughter, we are in this together. That idea of warmth, validation, validating feelings, okay? Remember, without feelings, there is no relationship. You might have heard me say this before, but work relationships are 90% facts, 10% feelings. Your boss is not your boss because they love you. Your boss is your boss because they regulate payroll and what you get done during the day. Love relationships are 90% feelings and 10% facts. See? The idea that my children and those members of my family are around me, not because they make money or contribute to the household, but because I love them and I'm going to be a part of this institution that creates this notion of growth. Okay? On the other extreme, though, I have the emotionally disengaged parent. And I get this a lot with blended families. I get where a mom who has bonded to their biological children, now that mom is separated from the biological father of those children, and I got mom living with kids, she begins to date, she marries, and now I got a father who comes in a parent who comes in who's not the father to these children, but I'm going to straighten this up. Okay, I'm going to show you little guys who's the boss. And we see this emotionally disengaged parent that tends to be cold, observing. They're watchful. They're looking for any indications of the children stepping out of bounds. They tend to be demanding. I want this done, and I want that done, and this is important. But remember, it's the facts that are important, not the feelings. We talked about work relationships, 90% facts, 10% feelings. So the non-biological partner comes in, and it's like work. We run the household like it's a job. It's a place where we're going to get this done and we're going to do that. And so the demanding part of it tends to be eroding and wearing down of any possibility of a bond. Unfortunately, this punishment aspect comes out because, you know, when you work for somebody and you don't do a good job, they either cut you off or fire you. You know, they hurt you in your pocket. When parents tend to be demanding, they tend to become punishment oriented by taking away privileges and rights. They tend to be more punitive in punishing. And so now that child sees the parent coming or the step parent coming, and now, you know, my God, I got to stay away from this person because this person's going to hurt me. This person is abusing me, if you will. The idea of no emotional bond there. And then finally, if you will, when we talk about parents that are emotionally disengaged, we tend to see them as being very actions focused. Do this, do that, go here, go there. And there's no idea about feelings, if you will. In couples relationships, I have a part there where if the statement I like to make is, it's not what's happening that's important in a relationship, it's how the person feels about what's happening. And when we tend to be actions focused, we're focused on what happened, not how we feel about what happened. And that can lead to a really horrible parent-child relationship, okay? If you will, let me talk about this, where this is all getting to, because as I've contrasted autocratic to the far left and permissive to the far right, I now want to throw across this notion on the left-hand side about emotionally engaged and emotionally disengaged, okay? Because when I work with an emotionally engaged autocratic family, that's a dad or mom, they love their kids, they're committed to raising their kids, but my God, I was raised in a military household and I was taught, that a household should be rules focused. And when we're rules focused, we're intolerant, and I'm going to do this for you because it's good for you. What's good for the child is why I'm all here. And so it hurts me because I love them to death, but I'm going to make sure that they are consequence focused. And when you look at the autocratic, emotionally engaged family, and you contrast that to the autocratic, disengaged family, gosh, how different is that, okay? And if you will, this is classic for me, because so often it is the lady who has 3 kids that has now met somebody, Mr. Right, brought Mr. Right into her home. Now, Mr. Right's going to straighten those kids up. See, he's emotionally disengaged. See, I love your mom, but I don't have a relationship with you. I fell in love with you, mom, but I haven't fell in love with the kids. There's no opportunity for that to happen. There's no bond. There's no emotional connection. You're kind of a residual product. And when we see this emotionally disengaged parent, step-parent, that's autocratic, we see blind obedience. Error will not be tolerated. My God, you know that pain. You remember I spanked you last time, and you don't want one of those to happen again, right? The idea that I am black and white, and finally this last notion of punishment-oriented. The emotionally disengaged parent who is autocratic is very punishment. It's all about kicking your little butt, okay? And you can imagine, how that works to, if you will, for the child to resist having a connection. Remember, emotional connection by the child and the parent is vital. If it don't occur, then, you got rough times ahead, okay? If you will, I want to contrast to the far right, where I'm talking about permissive parents that are emotionally engaged. And I see this too often, where I've got children that aren't going to school, they're not doing well, they are not attending class, and I talk to the mom, and the mom says, but they're such good kids. See, she's so involved with the children, but because she came from a background that lacks that notion of discipline, and there is no discipline. I live my life through my children are my life, but I'm not interested, if you will, enough in my children in an emotionally engaged way to be tied into the school system. And I had a lady recently, 4 kids, a set of twins. The older child hadn't been to school. He's 20 years old. He had dropped out at, I think, 11th grade when he had already failed 3. And when you try to talk to her about the kids and where they're going, oh my God, doting, loving, overly involved, not in their activities outside the home, overly involved in their emotions about I'm your mom and you're my child and I love you and your feelings are hurt. Oh, you poor thing. The child has too much power in making decisions. The parent is overly protected. And, I classically see the permissive, emotionally engaged mom as an enabler or a rescuer. We have a class on codependence, but if you will, those 2 notions, I rescue you when, life is awful and you need to be cared for, if you will. A classic example of rescuing is maybe a friend of yours who's lost their job due to irresponsibility, can no longer pay their rent, and they're about to be homeless, so you let them move into your house. You're going to rescue them from their consequences of their own irresponsibility, versus enablers that tend just to give too much. They give more than what is logical for that particular situation, if you will. Where I see a lot of enabling, I see women who are working 40 hours a week, overtime. They've got a live-in boyfriend who's not working, who's not really making any effort, and he's sitting around the house drinking beer all day, and yet there she is providing a house and sharing her income, enabling, okay? Now, I used a female to male example, but I've also can give you lots of examples where I see men that have enabled their partner that possibly has some other issues going on like drinking or alcohol, and there's the male, if you will, providing that secure, safe environment when there's a lot of reasons to say you need to stop. You're not learning from your mistakes, okay? And if you will, let me give you that last example about the emotionally disengaged, permissive. I have had clients that, they didn't intend to get pregnant. They got pregnant. I had a lady, she was in sales and she really enjoyed what she did, and all she could look forward to is to, get rid of being pregnant and get back to work, And so grandma was raising her child. She just didn't want to be involved. She had no interest in being a parent. And so I had emotionally disengaged, permissive, uninvolved, distant, removed, and very, very disconnected. And unfortunately, years later, when the child's 7, 8, 9 years old, the child's parent really is the grandparent and not the mom, the biological mom. And there was no connection. And so here we have later in life, we've got the biological parent coming to talk to me because she doesn't understand how I've gotten to this situation where my own children don't like me and don't care for me. And to be frank with you, she really hadn't allowed for herself to be emotionally involved with those kids. And she was so distant that she was uninvolved. She was emotionally disengaged and permissive. Excuse me. Next slide. Let me tell you where we're going with all this, if you will. And one more. There you go. Where I'm going with this is for you to recognize that each of these, whether it be autocratic to the left or democratic to the permissive to the right, has their pros and their cons. And when you try to be democratic, you're trying to work towards that center place, the loving parent that has the goal of launching the kids, you're creating rules, you want to be a mentor. That's what your goal is. But it's not really that simple because we tend to fluctuate. We tend to, on some things, parents are very, very autocratic. For instance, I have families that are very big believers in the educational system, and anything with school is about rules. You're going to come home, you're going to do your homework, and after you do your homework, then you can have these ideas of relaxation and free time. But then they're very permissive in terms of, well, once you finish all of your responsibilities around the house, then, you can go out and play, just be home by dark. So it's not black and white in terms of in the idea that we're all of one or all the other. The notion, though, that as an emotionally engaged parent, when I work to maintain that balance, yes, there's some things that you're going to have to be very strict about. And in terms of if you have a child that really doesn't like school, then you may find yourself creating a lot of rules about getting your homework done, et cetera, et cetera. Or if you have a child that's just a pig, just doesn't pick up after themselves, the house is always a mess, the clothes are all, then you may very well find yourself being autocratic in that area too. Also, keep in mind, some children just sort of naturally are inclined to pick up after themselves with a little bit of mentoring, if you will. Some kids love school, and yet you might find yourself, if you will, that you're permissive, but you don't realize you're permissive because your child has that natural characteristic to get to do it on their own. I recently had a couple that was just like that. They had one child that they don't remember ever having to tell that child to pick up after themselves, or to wash dishes, or to pick up their clothes, or to do studying, etc. And they were truly bewildered by this other child that just needed constant hovering and watchfulness because they were so out of control. And they were looking at me saying, how did we go wrong? What mistakes have we made? And the truth is, there were no mistakes. The individual characteristics and personality propensities of each child are such, you may not even realize that you're permissive because your child is so inclined to get into the groove of working towards, that appropriate parent-child relationship. And they're doing good in school, and they're picking up after themselves, and they're responsible, etc. And so this is one of these things you have to reflect back at yourself and take an inventory, okay? Again, this is a really good class. I just want you to take a look at your parenting style. In the big picture, just recognize these differences. if you've identified that you're permissive and emotionally engaged and you tend to do that too much, or if you tend to, and I had one lady who called me and says, I just realized that my dad was military and my husband's in the military, and oh my God, I never realized how autocratic I am, and I am emotionally engaged. And so the question is, how do I balance myself? How do I move from this into the center? And that's the purpose of this particular briefing, to just give you the ideas that you might want to find something that's more middle ground, and to give you that sort of a lay of the land to know what this is all about, okay? Again, I'm Dr. Pilet. I hope you've enjoyed this. Again, the topic was autocratic, democratic, and permissive parenting styles. Thank you very much. Good? The last part is kind of what I want you to get out of this. You know, the last part, which is this idea of